to follow. And as today is the Youth and Empowerment Day to transition, I would like to refer to two other quotes from youth leaders. And by youth leaders, I mean leaders that happen to be young. The first of them being blah, blah, blah. The second of them being even storms decay, but words stay. And to a large extent, the legal community and negotiators navigate that line between blah, 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 and having words that are stronger than stones. So to explore this session on negotiating the climate change progress, I'm particularly pleased to be joined here by an eminent panel. So I'll get started actually by introducing immediately to my right, Professor Christina Voigt, who's co-chair of the Paris Agreement Implementation and Compliance Committee, as well as chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, and ask her about her perspective as for what it means for her negotiating climate change progress, specifically perhaps in the context of COP26.
Thank you. I wasn't aware that this was what you're going to to me, but I'm trying to answer it. What does it mean to negotiate climate change progress? I think the most important thing is to get everyone on board and move together forward. And I guess that's probably the most difficult, but also the most rewarding result that you can get out of these negotiations. We've seen it in Paris. We've seen it in Katowice, very important with the rule book, and we hopefully see important progress also here. But what I also want to talk about a little bit is the expectations towards this particular COP26 here in Glasgow, which is a bit of a compact term, because it's not only COP26, it's also CMA3, and it's also a meeting of the Kyoto Protocol governing body. What we've seen so far are high-level speeches by heads of state, and we've seen very important initiatives being launched and going forward on forests, on steel, on methane, on transport, on so many different things. And these are really important initiatives because they set in motion changes that are needed. And we've heard already that they may lead to warming around 1.8 degrees. That's well below 2 degrees if they're implemented. And many of these aspects lie outside parties' nationally determined contributions. And that's good because they come in addition to them. But what's also really important that this COP delivers on are actually the outstanding elements of the Paris Agreement rulebook, because we need those details. And they are details that they sound technical, they don't sound really that sexy when you talk about common reporting tables for national inventory reports or common reporting tables for biannual transparency report. You kind of fall asleep before you enter the topic. But these are important elements that need to be agreed on, including common timeframes, the rules for the compliance committee. That's what I follow primarily, because they are the fundament of how to make Paris work. And we need Paris to work because that's the fundament of everything we do. And these other initiatives come in addition to it. So I think having very good, solid outcomes on these technical elements is something that's very important of this COP or the CMA to deliver. That also includes, of course, Article 8 and all its sub-elements. And in addition, we also have to see progress on some of the larger looming issues that are not yet decided. For example, global goal on adaptation, global finance goal for 2025, where the $100 billion are just a floor. Loss and damage, and I'm sure we hear more about it. These are issues that need to be, well, we need to start to have a real discussion about, and where this particular COP can start delivering on. Currently, we also see a lot of discussion around what is called the cover decisions, might be yet another a technical term, but these are the decisions, the first decisions by the COP, by the CMA and the CMP, where we'll see all these speeches that have been made by heads of state to be condensed into some paragraphs, but also put into decisions, consensus-based decisions by the governing bodies. These are issues, for example, keeping 1.5 alive, closing the ambition and the finance gap, what has been done, what is the gap, how can the gap be closed, and so forth. So the success of this COP will be measured on delivering on all of these aspects. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done between now and the 13th of November, when we wake up and are hopefully happy about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this exhaustive coverage of the important issues that are still to be decided and negotiated here in Glasgow. I now turn to you, Hafij, as loss and damages is an important topic in the context of COP26, has been gaining in importance over the last several years, and I think that's due in no small part to your important work. Could you tell us a bit more about the ongoing state of play when it comes to loss and damages here at COP26?
Thank you, Ayman. Hello, friends and colleagues. Actually, I'm involved with this process more than a decade. It's my 13th COP. So, but still I feel I'm a student in this process. That's why I'm doing my PhD with Professor Marie Claire on loss and damage. So with that said, before talking current state of the negotiation, I would like to tell you some of my community experiences. Basically, I'm a community lawyer. I'm working last 16 years with vulnerable communities in Bangladesh. So what are the needs of the vulnerable communities and what are the needs of the vulnerable ecosystems we need to identify? Then we can expect what to deliver from this UNFCCC processes. So my experiences of long working with the vulnerable communities and ecosystem that reveals that we need to identify the needs of the vulnerable communities first. So need assessment is our first priority. Then second, we need to think about the risk assessment tools. We need to identify the current state of loss and damage, also potential risk of the loss and damage. So it is a challenge to identify the right tools and methodologies that must involve the vulnerable communities to identify their sort of tools and methodologies. That's the second challenge. Third challenge is to identify the right approaches. Once we can identify the nature of the loss and damage, then we can identify the right approaches. And when we can identify the right approaches, then we need to set up a right set of institutional structures. These institutional structures needs to be designed at the local level, national level, regional level, at the international level. So once we can identify those institutions, we need to have the legal and policy mandates for those institutions to for their effective functions. That's what about the local level discussion. That with that demand from the community, I'm here at the UNFCCC to negotiate. I'm working with the LDC group as a co-coordinator. So what's our demand? Basically, here at the COP26, we are here for the three key crunch issues. That is, we would like to structure Santiago network as an implementation arm of the Warsaw International Mechanism. But unfortunately, our partners, developed country parties, they are taking it very lightly. They're thinking it's a mere network of the relevant organizations, experts, and bodies. But we, at least developing countries, we have 48 countries, we are demanding to identify right set of functions, and those functions needs to be delivered with effective institutional structures that can meet the needs of vulnerable communities, that can meet needs the vulnerable ecosystems. That's why we are struggling here to agree on the functions. Today, whole day, we worked on this basically on functions of the Santiago network, and we would like to structure the right set of institutions in next SBs. Secondly, I would like to highlight the finance issues. While I was talking of the community needs, we all do realize that without financial resources, without technical support, we cannot act at the local level. So finance is our highest demand, but unfortunately, finance is so-called sensitive issues for the developed country parties. But we demand for finance immediately. You know, my friends and colleagues, that is, there are a good number of financial entities established under the UNFCCC processes. We need to access now. We don't know how. That's the big question for us. You know, Green Climate Fund is mandated to provide funding for 50% mitigation and 50% adaptation. What about the loss and damage? That's a big ask. Thirdly, you might know the governance issue. Yeah, last second. Governance issues. Developed country parties are thinking that the Warsaw International Mechanism would be governed solely by Paris Agreement, but that was established under UNFCCC. We demand the dual governance. That would be the question for the next week at the high-level ministerial, and we're very much looking forward to that one. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing with us. Article 6 is on the top of everyone's mind and also earlier in those beautiful remarks by the youth leader that we heard, thanks to Wendy moments ago. She wasn't necessarily the most convinced about carbon markets. How would you react to her belief? And could you share a bit about the current state of play about this strategic article in COP26? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ayman, and fellow panelists. It's a pleasure to be here. So indeed, Christina described a plethora of different issues that we want to see progress on at this COP. Article 6, for various reasons, is one of the key issues because it has held up progress in the past. And I'll try to share sort of where these dividing lines lie and what has to be overcome to come together, as Christina correctly pointed out, if we want progress. So carbon markets have been quite divisive from the beginning. It was the United States in particular that sort of strong-armed other countries, including the EU, to acquiesce to having it included in the Kyoto Protocol. And the track record has been very mixed. Some would say the glass is half full. We have seen, for instance, more than $2 billion in climate finance being transferred to developing countries under the Clean Development Mechanism. At the same time, there have been a number of projects with very doubtful environmental benefits. They've been concentrated in a small handful of countries, certainly not in least developed countries, for instance. And there were indeed fraudulent projects. So there was a lot of negative experience, a lot of improvement necessary. And so it's no surprise that coming to COP21 in Paris, views were still very divided on whether or not this is a useful tool or not. In fact, Article 6 was the last provision in the Paris Agreement that was agreed in the mornings of overtime ahead of adopting the Paris Agreement. And it is the one issue on which the Paris Rulebook has still not been finalized. So the guidance on Article 6.2, the rules, modalities, and procedures for Article 6.4 are the one outstanding element of the Paris Rulebook. And and 6.8 is an important provision, but it's very unique and very different. So I won't even breach that, also in interest of time. And again, just to give you a sense of the stakes that are in play here. So the proponents will argue, and there's credible research that shows if you use these mechanisms, they were implemented in a robust manner, you could reduce the cost of achieving our NDCs by up to 60–70%. Put differently, you could more than double the ambition at no extra cost. So with the current investments, which already lag far behind the projected financial, finance and investment needs, not just north-south transfers, but generally into our economies, this could get us to progress. We need to close a 28 gigaton gap to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Some say Article 6 could get us a quarter of the way to that. And we certainly can use any help to close that gap. And at the same time, if we don't implement them properly, this could become a total disaster in terms of getting hot air, swamping, making NDCs achievable with hot air and with no real climate effort. And so that's sort of where these dividing lines are. There are some legal issues here, and lawyers do have something to say. Human rights are being discussed to be included in these rules, for instance. There are technical issues, baselines, additionality, but many issues are very political. In the end, it comes down to politics. Those who follow international law know that politics is really always the other side of the coin of any legal argument. One party or one group of parties will point to a specific provision in the Paris Agreement where it does not say that parties need to, for instance, deliver a share of proceeds or an overall mitigation of global emissions. The other party will say, but look at the ambition provisions, look at the principles and objectives of the Paris Agreement. So you have this sort of up and down, this ascending and descending argument in the legal arguments here. One example, for instance, just one issue I'll pick out is, should we allow Kyoto units from pre-2020 to swamp the future market? And least developed countries group, the Arab group, but also many of the developed countries say, under no circumstances. Some countries, Brazil, the like-minded developing countries group, China, etc., say, we have to honor the trust of our project developers. And of course, there's economic interest. There's a lot of credits in there. There is space for compromise. One can define sort of thresholds and cutoff periods that would minimize how many of these units go and water down, if you like, ambition under the Paris Agreement. But finding that compromise is difficult, and it takes courage, because any compromise will be seen as a violation of, either the goals of the Paris Agreement or, again, the interests of these countries. So I hope that our negotiators, there's a new negotiating text that just came out this morning. I hope negotiators will find that space to come together, but it's by no means guaranteed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this very impressive presentation and sharing of expertise. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. So you also mentioned at some point human rights as a topic of interest, and human rights was also something that was negotiated in the context of the environment this year. So when it comes to providing the closing keynote of this section, particularly pleased to invite Professor David Voigt, who's the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights and Environment at the United Nations, as well as a professor at the University of British Columbia, to share with us his views.
Great. Good morning from Canada. Thank you. And I wish I could be there with you in person. But look, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, we all know that we are living in a climate emergency. The Secretary General's words upon the release of the last IPCC report calling this code red for humanity. And we have the IPCC and IPBES and all of the world's leading scientific bodies calling for rapid, systemic, and transformative changes. But what I really want to emphasize, and I was delighted to see that video from India, from Aotearoa earlier, the global climate crisis is also a human rights crisis. And we have to recognize this, that the rights to life, health, food, water, cultural rights, the rights of the child, and of course, the right to a healthy environment are being violated on a daily basis, with the adverse impacts falling disproportionately upon the shoulders of poor and marginalized populations. In my role as the UN Special Rapporteur, I have witnessed firsthand the devastation that is being caused by climate change. I visited Vunidogoloa, a Fijian village that had to be completely relocated because of rising sea levels, storm surges, and saltwater contamination of their water supply and agricultural lands. I met with people who lost their homes in powerful cyclones in Fiji and the Philippines. I met people living in rough, informal settlements who'd been rendered homeless by these cyclones and are now suffering from outbreaks of waterborne disease like typhoid fever because of floods that, again, are exacerbated by climate change. I've met with pastoralists in Kenya whose livestock starved to death because of drought, again, exacerbated by climate change. I met with indigenous Sami people in northern Norway whose traditional culture based on reindeer herding is jeopardized by warm and erratic winter weather. It's clear that these people in Fiji, Kenya, and other climate vulnerable nations have almost zero responsibility in causing climate change. And yet they are bearing the costs, losing their homes and livelihoods, relocating and rebuilding their communities. And I'm sharing this story because most of the people at this conference are likely from G20 nations, nations that cause 80% of greenhouse gas emissions today and an even higher proportion historically. So the G20 really must lead the way in cutting emissions and in paying for both adaptation and loss and damage. It's been 3 decades since governments negotiated the Framework Convention on Climate Change, promising to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the Earth's climate system. 25 COPs later, here we are again talking about the same type of commitments. The burning of coal, natural gas, and oil has skyrocketed since 1992. Greenhouse gas emissions are up more than 60%. And the Achilles heel of these international environmental agreements, the Framework Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, is a lack of effective compliance and enforcement mechanisms, which results in a lack of accountability. And that's where human rights have such a critically important role to play. We know from history that human rights can be a catalyst for transformative changes in society. The abolitionists invoking freedom and equality to end slavery, the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-apartheid movement, indigenous persons, persons with disabilities, all using human rights to catalyze societal transformations. Human rights are not an instant, easy, or omnipotent solution, but history proves that they can be game changers. And so that's why I'm really actually delighted to report that 3 weeks ago today, the United Nations Human Rights Council recognized for the first time that everyone everywhere has the right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, a right that surely includes the right to a healthy and safe climate. Although not legally binding, this resolution will be a catalyst for more ambitious action at the national level. We can look back at the 2010 UN resolution on the right to water and sanitation to see the types of impacts these resolutions have. A number of countries, including Costa Rica, Fiji, Mexico, Slovenia, and Tunisia, amended their constitutions, their highest and strongest laws. Other countries from Colombia to France added this right to legislation. And most importantly, nations accelerated actions to fulfill the right to water. Mexico has extended clean drinking water to more than 1,000 rural communities in the past decade. Slovenia has prioritized safe water for Roma communities living in informal settlements. And here in Canada, safe drinking water infrastructure has been built in partnership with 117 Indigenous communities that had suffered without clean water for decades. So the bottom line is this: we must ensure that human rights are put at the heart of all climate action, mitigation, adaptation, and addressing loss and damage. And this must be recognized for what it is legally, an obligation, not an option. We must all seize the moment and use the right to a healthy environment as a battering ram to knock down the walls of resistance that are holding us back from making the rapid, systemic, and transformative changes necessary to address the climate crisis and accelerate progress towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, the time for talk is really over. It is time for action. So thank you for listening, and I hope we can work together in the months and years ahead.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, some logistics that are being worked out. Thank you very much. So as we heard earlier today from Lord Cornwall, he was expressing his appreciation to be meeting with real people again. We then also heard that those real people have real problems, and that was quite recalled by the testimony that was shared just now by David. But at the same time, there's real progress that is being made, has been made over the last few weeks. There's opportunity and potential for real progress to still be made in the days ahead in the context of COP26. And in terms of announcing the real reception that will conclude our day, I'm happy to leave the floor to Professor Marie-Claire Codonis again. Thank you.
And actually, as we do conclude this day and we move to the closing session, I've been asked to make a very special announcement here because some of our most promising young leaders have been unable to join us in person. And over the last year, they have been competing in a global essay competition, climate law essay competition. Because they are listening online and there is not going to be an online component to the reception, I'm very, very happy to announce today the winners of the Climate Law and Governance Day 2021 and also 2020 Climate Law Essay Competition. In order of upwards, I'd like to announce 4 judges' commendations. The first one is to Aymeric Bricot for a paper on climate justice as a prerequisite for ensuring the success of emission reduction policies. He's of Imperial College, UK. I'd like to announce also for Janvi from the School of Planning and Architecture of Delhi, India, for the paper on a behavioral perspective, urban climate policies and plans. For Dinita Setyawati from Kyoto University in Japan, for a paper on the pursuit of justice for Indigenous people through the climate change agendas in Indonesia, and for a paper by Aaron Gallagher on the Paris Agreement and domestic climate litigation from the University of Strathclyde here in the UK. These 4 winners have received the judges' commendation. We owe them a round of applause. Now on to the final awards. The winners of the silver awards, it was a tie, were Larissa Parker for her paper on non-justiciability for public interest climate litigation from McGill University in Canada, and Elena Bonfiglio for her paper on latest developments in emission trading from the Università della Svizzera in Italy. As gold tide winners, we have Jacob Bohill for his paper on analyzing practical and legal challenges in the retention of small island developing statehood, considering predicted climate-driven submersion or uninhabitability of territory. From the University of Glasgow here in the UK, gold winner. And we have Anita Lucchini for her paper on the unsustainability of central banks' collateral frameworks, a carbon bias, from the University of Trento in Italy. And finally, for our two tied platinum winners, we are very pleased to congratulate both Stefan Prelevic and Marcelo Molina Villalobos for their papers on child rights and climate change, litigative avenues for Australian children. And again, Stefan is from the University of Melbourne in Australia. And Marcelo for his paper on la judicialización del cambio climático a través del derecho internacional del mar from the Universidad de Chile. Congratulations to all of those young people and to everyone who participated both as judges and as competitors.
Congratulations for this brilliant work to all the winners and everybody that submitted any work in that context. So back to the real reception. You will be following some facilitators that will guide you to where we'll be convening to enjoy each other's company, while respecting, of course, all applicable measure of safe distanciation. And yes, so I guess this concludes today at this point. Thank you very much, and see you at the reception.
The Global Leadership Awards will be announced in the reception. So if you'd like to find out who are our 2021 winners of the Climate Law and Governance Global Leadership Awards, please come to the reception at the Hunterian Gallery now. Thank you.
For sure. For sure.